What's up, y'all? It's Dante, aka the Forensics Guy, and you are listening to the Forensic Experience, the podcast where we discuss topics in the speech and debate community with the world's most influential coaches, students, and alumni in the activity. I am honored to be here with Ernest Chomicki, a speech and debate coach from Wisconsin. I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself. How's it going, Ernest?
It's going pretty good. Just got done with church. I made me some breakfast, and I've been awake to do this broadcast. I'm very honored that you asked.
Of course. Thank you so much once again just for taking the opportunity to be on. I hope this is a great opportunity for students to be able to listen, as well as coaches and alumni and even judges and parents, so they can get an opportunity to have the chance to listen and hopefully be inspired by everything. So today we're going to talk a little bit about basically something that I think we can both honestly say is pretty near and dear to our hearts as competitors in the speech and debate community in the past. We need to talk a little bit more about how we can get more people that look like us to do speech and debate. And for those that are listening, you probably can't see us, but I know that a lot of you probably follow my Instagram and stuff like that, so you can tell what I mean by look like us. Which I mean, how can you get students who are of color to be able to do speech and debate more often? I think that it comes from a lot of different perspectives, and we're going to try to touch every perspective if possible today, from the students themselves to the schools to the funding to programs and everything. So, um, can you give us a little bit, Ernest, just about your experience in speech and debate? What years did you compete and stuff like that? And how did you feel personally, like as a African American student in the speech and debate community?
So, just to give a little background about myself, I have it also in the bio as well. So I'm biracial. So my mom is Sicilian and Polish, and my dad is black, my African American. I like to think of them a little bit like it's basically being in a household with Red Fox, the comedian, and Lucille Ball. That's basically how my life was. And so I'm a proud product of Milwaukee Public Schools. I was in Milwaukee Public Schools from kindergarten all the way until 12th grade. Now, I started out doing forensics, well, speech, in 7th grade when my English teacher, Miss Yunker, had us all do like demonstration speeches. And she noticed like I was the only one that was one of the few not doing anything involving cooking. I actually was making candles, and she suggested that I start out with doing special occasion. So I did that 7th grade for like a couple tournaments, and I completely sucked. And so I was like, but I like this, so I want to come back, but I want to do poetry. So I went ahead and I did poetry. I was one of those kids that was like into reading like John Milton, Paradise Lost, and William Blake
Okay.
and Byron, just reading poetry like that. I was into Greek mythology. I was always doing like extra reading. And so I was reading William Blake, and I started out doing poetry in 8th grade, and I completely sucked. And so she was suggesting putting me in a different category. And I said, you know what? Let me go ahead and write my own poetry, and let's see what happens. And so I went to a tournament with a poem that I wrote, and I did not make it to a final round, but a judge said, you wrote just one of the best poems I've ever, heard a middle schooler write. You need to write another one, something similar, and go and compete. And so I did it the next tournament. I wrote another one to kind of like match the theme, and I ended up making it to my first final. And I ended up taking third that night, and the love of forensics just grew. Now, when I got to high school, I kind of was like, okay, well, how my middle school was going to be like how my high school was, because there was like maybe 20 some students on my middle school team. And, there was just a lot of enthusiasm. And then when I got to high school, which was Milwaukee Tech, that dropped because Tech at that time was really big into athletics, but not into things like debate and speech. And like my first 3 years of doing debate, we only went to 5 tournaments total. And we kept like coaches would like if we didn't do well immediately, they would drop out. they would say, we're done with the season, y'all aren't working hard enough, or we're not doing well enough. And there was
Wow.
never the let's dig in and work harder. Right. When it came to forensics, we would only go to like 4 meets a season. And, the coach would come in with like a list of all these tournaments, but we never went to them. And, it wasn't until like my junior, senior year when we started venturing outside of the city that we ended up starting to do better. And so after I graduated, I came back to help out with the coach. And then eventually I kind of came into the coaching role. And as I grew as a coach in person, then the team grew as well. And now we've become, we've been on the national circuit and we've been successful on the national circuit as well. So we've done well in the state and we've done well outside of it.
Awesome. So I love the way you got into forensics as a whole. It's very similar to my story, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners pretty much know me and know how much I talk about my favorite person of all time, basically Miss Gonzalez, who was my 8th grade English teacher who got me into forensics, and she just noticed how much I love to read and write and poetry and stuff like that, and that's what I started with too. I started with my own poem, and it was the worst, and I actually switched. I did the opposite of kind of what you did, and then
Mm-hmm.
when I decided to actually take someone else's thing and kind of interpret that in my own way, it started to become a much better product because I love just the opportunity of being in that limelight and kind of doing the acting as a whole. And it just really gave me an
Yes.
opportunity to just, do my best and be as creative as possible, especially with someone else's work. It's really interesting on how there is a lot of creativity with performing something written by someone else because you just really don't understand what they intended and how it was meant to come about. So I really love that. Um, and for me, my middle school team was pretty small as well for the most part. Actually, I think my middle school team was a little smaller than my high school, but my high school team was about 10 kids. So I definitely feel the pain there of not
Yes.
having a lot of students on the team. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. With my school specifically, we weren't as athletic, but we were very academic in a lot of ways. So we had other things that a lot of people were doing, like chess team. We were ranked
Yes.
really high in the nation for our chess skills and other clubs and activities that definitely would take away from speech and debate. And that's okay. But I do think that we can find more ways, hopefully, to make speech and debate something that I would love to see every school have 150 roster, the same roster that a lot of these other schools in these areas where they're just able to have it, are having it. And I want to switch back because I want to talk a little bit about the idea of speech and debate. So when you went to Tech, how
Yeah.
many students were basically non-white? How many students were non-white on your team?
So when I was competing, right?
Yes, when you were competing.
Well, I think a lot of it dealt with just the sign of the times because, like, when I got to tech, it was very diverse. I've only really been around very diverse things, So, I mean, diverse, like schools or environments, I should say. And so, you had a nice mix of like white, black, Hispanic, Asian, all throughout the school, but primarily debate and speech was primarily African American. I would say probably 90%.
Interesting.
90 to 95%. Even at that time, it was. And it was always a bit of a struggle to get, different races into debate and speech. I was just when they made me captain, I was always just saying, hey, if you're walking, down the hallway, you're a good fit for debate and forensics. Hey, do you like oxygen? I do too. You should come to debate and forensics. And that's basically, hey, you've got hair. I don't. We got something in common that we both know what hair is. You should come and do debate. Like I was always trying to promote no matter what, and it didn't matter who. And so, I mean, I think we saw a little bit more diversity after I became the coach, and I just was able to work on my sales pitch.
Yeah.
But even still, even like to this day, it is still primarily debate and speech is still primarily African American. Although we've got more students who are Latino that are doing debate,
Awesome.
and doing a little bit more forensics. But yeah, it's a bit of a struggle. Sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's um I don't know. It's a very there's a lot of reasons why, and I think that just in general, I think with Bradley Tech, the kids are definitely pushed. You've got different mindsets. Sometimes the families will say, no, we only want you to do sports.
Yeah,
Sometimes the families will say, no, the kids you have to pick. You can't do debate and speech and do a sport. You've got to pick between one or the other, or they'll push their kids towards sports. We've had an instance of that. You'll have instances where the parents are like, or the families are like, no, you have to go get a job after school.
true.
And there's also one where the
Yes, I was going to say I think we lost you a little bit on the thing here, but now I'm able to hear you a lot better.
no, I'm sorry.
Would you
So
mind
a
repeating
phone call was
what you
coming.
said?
A phone call was coming in. I just hurried up and got it off. But no. So like sometimes you have like kids who are very, very high achieving students who are only pushed to get good grades and then go straight home. And
Yeah,
so kids who could benefit from having multiple activities sometimes don't. So it's a lot you have to kind of fight. And I think a lot of it is in a sense that you have parents who don't understand debate and speech. They don't understand that you can get um desirable by colleges. Because that was my experience after, when is that you can get scholarships hand over fist, and that it's almost like a secret society. Like there's so many people in positions of power or in managerial leadership roles that have done debate and speech, and once you sit there and you say, hey, I was in forensics, oh, I did debate, it's like, oh my god, what categories you do? I did extemp. What category? Oh, you did special occasion? Okay, and now all of a sudden you've got a common ground to
true.
where now you network. But so many people do not realize, and even when I've tried to bring this up to parents and let them know, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other because it's so hard to break that mindset.
I definitely can understand that. It's really interesting just because I used to always say that like speech and debate is like the positive version of the Illuminati. You can have
Yeah,
you can
you're
have
right. That's a very good way of putting it.
like it's like the secret society that does a lot of good and has a lot of good happen to them because they did it, and it's really awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of going from that is I know that you specifically were in an interesting situation because you said a lot of the speech and debate people on your team, they were African American. But I think
Yeah.
that we can both agree that that's not necessarily representative of what we see in the entire community as a whole. And
No.
like I was very lucky to have gone to a very very diverse school in high school, and even with just the 10 students on our team, there were like two black students, like some white students, and I remember a Latino or two, and it felt very diverse and it was great. But as I started to coach, I started to realize how many students that are like white that compete in so many different sectors, especially when we look at the circuit debate. And and in its essence, circuit debate has always been at least this is just my personal way of looking at it. I feel like it's basically the private school of speech and debate. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it does kind of go back to some ideals from the past of that if this is something that you basically need to pay to play to get into, then it's something that a lot of races that have been basically abused on a social spectrum in the past, they don't have an opportunity to do it because they don't have the finances. Like I can promise you that when I was 16 and 15 and I wanted to compete in a speech and debate, if they would have mentioned something about, TOC or NIETOC or traveling on these circuit tournaments and paying, so much money to go on the airplane, to stay in the hotels, to do all of this. it definitely wasn't something that my mom would have been able to say like, "Oh yeah, go ahead. I got an extra, 3,000 in the bank," and it's crazy. You have to
Right.
have a good amount of money, whether it's from the school's perspective or the student's perspective. But no matter what, you're definitely pushing some money into that, and I think we need to figure out a way to try to make this activity as a whole more equal for everybody to have a shot at competing, basically. And I would like to ask your opinion of how do you think we can do that?
There's a lot that has to be done to me. And I
Okay.
mean, we could sit there. At some point, it sounds a bit like there's things that have to fall into place. And then you have to basically, a lot has to come together. And you need a lot of cooperation and coordination for those things to happen. And after you've went through everything, it sounds very utopian.
Yeah.
And so that leads me to be a little bit pessimistic. I mean, to be honest with you, I honestly feel so. We were discussing yesterday a little bit, or I mean, Friday a little bit, but I mean, like, for instance, I feel like the to get more students of color into like the circuit debate or circuit forensics or even to be competitive, it really all boils down to the coach.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I've learned this throughout the years because I know myself, but like, I mean, the sad thing, and I don't want anybody to have sympathy for me, but I do want people to understand that like when I said that I went to 5 tournaments the first 3 years for debate, that's not a lie. I went to every tournament. It was just the first year we went, like the coach that we had, God rest his soul, he passed, but like we weren't practicing. We weren't sitting there and sitting down and understanding the evidence. We were just coming to practices and talking. And I'm like, well, I'm used to practice from middle school. Can we practice? And I would be
Yeah.
waved off. Oh, we'll be fine. We don't have enough people. And he was very laissez-faire. And I mean, my first debate went terrible. And I was like, but you know what? I'm going to come back. I'm going to be stronger. And then he got sick, and then nobody took the position over. My sophomore year, we had a coach who took the position over, and we went to 2 tournaments. That second tournament, I think we got into the season late. That's one big problem. The second problem was because it was 4-person debate at that time, so we needed 4 people. We came into practice with 3 people. One person couldn't show up. He said, we're not going to this turn. No, that was the third tournament. We went to 2 tournaments. I think we went like 1-5 or 2-4, and then by the third tournament he was done. And I mean, he told me, because I was like, can we go to these Saturday tournaments so we can qualify for state? And his exact words were, we're going to get beaten up by the suburban schools. And I'm like,
Wow.
that wasn't my question. Like, we're getting beat up here on the Friday night circuits when we're just going against local competition here. I don't care about getting beat up. I care about the experience. I want to go and see. Like, I'm like, let me see. Junior year, I had to recruit my own debate coach. And then it was sad thing is, and not to toot my own horn, but I had to actually coach the team because like we would be in practices and I'm like, I guess in my naivete, you're a kid, you don't know no better. You think once you recruit your coach or you get a coach, they're going to try to go through and try to learn debate. In actuality, all she did was grade papers while we sat there and coached ourselves. And then had the nerve to say that we weren't being serious by like the third debate. And it's
Wow.
like, so y'all just getting a paycheck and then you don't want to sit there and take us to no more tournaments. And I mean, it really, it left an indelible mark after I became coach, that I'm just like, I don't do this with the kids. I'm going to sit there and say, okay, if things aren't going well, we're going to sit there and we're going to dig deeper and we're going to go harder. And I'm looking at how am I structuring my practices? What can I sit there and do? Okay, this student has trouble reading this. Let's work on the reading. This student has trouble with comprehension. It means you got to dig. And, a sad thing is that we need more coaches, especially coaches of color who've come from our background to go back into the schools that have the dedication, the determination, and the patience to sit there and say, okay, this is what we've done. Now we're going to sit there and dig and we're going to make sure that we slowly build up these programs and these teams. And that in itself is incredibly difficult because I always feel like with the coach, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
And you can have a really good coach, and then on top of that, the coach is sometimes fighting administration issues. There's sometimes fighting teachers. There's a battle sometimes for some of the best students. Sad thing is, at the school that I was coaching at, we have a very loving, like, the administration overall is just the teachers, the staff. It's just amazing. I love Bradley Tech, but we fight over students sometimes. I mean, not like fist fight, but like you look at the best kids, and then all of a sudden they're doing multiple activities, which is great, but then again they're spread thin.
True.
So some of the successful students, I remember there was one kid I had who ended up going to Marquette, but like he said yes to everything. Every time someone gave him some, like, hey, we love you to come do this, you should come do this, you should do, he was saying yes to everything. And then he started coming back and telling me no to this, and he couldn't do this because he was doing X, Y, and Z. And then it's like, okay, well, how your season ends is how your season ends. Now, he ended up going to nationals, but he didn't go as far as he could. Now, this is a kid who's brilliant. And I mean, we talked about it last year, and he had a lot of regret that he didn't put 100 into debate and speech. He was like, I could have been in such a higher position and gotten more out of the activity, but I said yes to so many different things. So you have to sometimes, as a coach, deal with all those ups and downs. But it really boils down to the coaches individually building up the team. That's the toughest thing. And
Yeah.
it's the coach. If the coach is strong enough and patient enough to sacrifice and put into the school and the kids and the team, then you'll have more, schools of color coming out to those circuits. And it can be very, very, very difficult.
I think you bring up a really great point. And one thing that I definitely want to touch on that you said was, you know, finding dedicated coaches. And that's the toughest thing is how can we like find, those coaches that are willing to truly dedicate themselves, like especially at these schools where you mentioned, it's very common for a 15-year-old to have a second job because they're probably helping support their family and trying to, pay rent every month and all of this. Like, we need to figure out a way and a coach that can help and navigate between those things. I know even for myself, when I coached at Lake Country Middle School, there were a lot of students who were spread thin. There were a lot of students who were like, I'm doing soccer, I'm doing First Stage, which is a theater place in Wisconsin. They were also doing all these other things, and they were like, it's really hard for me to maybe put in this extra time for forensics. But I tried to figure out ways. There were students that I met, at times that were outside of practice, and was like, all right, I'll be here on this day at school, so let's go through it. Let's hear what you got, and let's try to work on it and make it better. And I tried my best to manipulate my schedule to be able to make that work for everyone. But I think that the hardest part is how can we motivate the coaches to want to dedicate that? Because I have to I sympathize and even empathize a little bit with the coaches that are like, I can't put in this much work because I need to support myself, like when for I know some people at certain schools don't understand because they're living the life and they're making like 70, 80K being a director, but
Right.
there are a lot of coaches who are in these positions where there's like, oh, this is just a after school activity and we'll give you $1,300 for the whole year to coach. And it's like,
Right.
okay, let's try to figure this out then. And you can't put in that much time because you probably are also, you got a side job at Pick and Save, or if you're from, the West Coast, Safeway or something like that. But where do you find the time to be able to, help the students out to the best of your ability and make enough money to be able to feel comfortable in your living environment?
Well, it also becomes even more problematic too. And I'm glad you brought up about like a teacher doing a second job. Now, there's been this crisis where the teachers right now aren't getting paid enough. Now, I can't speak for Wisconsin per se, but I've heard of instances like in Oklahoma where, the teachers aren't even able to make ends meet. Like after they teach, then they have to go ahead and
Wow.
go to another job. And then, like, on top of that, they're not given a lot of money for supplies. So some of the supplies that the students need, that comes out of the teacher's money.
True.
And I can speak to my experience because, like, I've sat up in here and I've paid for copies for kids out of my pocket. I've paid for evidence for the students for Lincoln Douglas out of my pocket. I went and got markers and stuff on sale so I don't have to take too much from the school. Um, the big thing here too is it's also a little like you probably have teachers that are very like dedicated and will be like, I would love to sit there and coach this activity. Yes, sign me up. And then now you've got a target on your back because
Yeah.
see now what happens is, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it becomes bad consequentially because now, hey, this teacher is really involved in these kids. This teacher loves these students. Look at their coaching debate and forensics. They're very passionate. Okay, well, now they stand out because they're successful. You know what? We need this teacher to do X, Y, and Z now. So the teachers that are putting in 100% into doing something like debate and forensics. Now all of a sudden they're being pushed to be administrators or they're given more work. Like, okay, we're going to make you department chair. And it's not like they necessarily get higher pay, but they get
Yeah.
more work, same pay, and you're expected to sit there and still, do well with debate and speech. But you already know that, guess what? With these other responsibilities, I can't now put 100 into debate and speech right now and and into my family if you've got one and top of you potentially might having another job. So now the thing that suffers is the education of the students who are doing debate and speech now.
That's so true. I think
You know,
you bring up some really strong points that I love. What I'm going to do right now, actually, though, is I'm going to take a quick break.
okay.
So for all the people that are listening, I hope you all are really enjoying the episode so far. We're going to take a break. We are basically just going to hear a quick word from our sponsors. So make sure you stay tuned. And if you want to join the conversation, feel free to leave a comment or DM me on my Instagram at the Forensics Guy, and we'll be right back.
Hey, what's up? I hope y'all are enjoying the podcast so far. So, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm just going to tell you about the one thing that I want to promote here is my Patreon. So, I am trying to make this a real career and doing the podcast, the videos, and all of these other things. So, I am definitely looking for your type of support. Whether it is financially, you're able to join the Patreon or just through sharing and letting other people know about this content and what I'm doing. It would be very helpful. So I'd appreciate it if you could just let people know. I'll link my Patreon at the bottom of this episode on the podcast apps, as well as you'll also see it on like YouTube and stuff like that. It's the Forensics Guy on my Patreon. So go to patreon.com /the Forensics Guy and you will see it there. Let's get back to the episode.
Welcome back. We have been discussing some great things about this speech and debate community, and I hope you all are listening and enjoying. As I said before, if you want to join the conversation, definitely leave some comments, DM me, the Forensics Guy, and we're going to keep this conversation going because I think we were talking about some really hot points right now. And last we left, we were actually talking about teachers specifically in the education system and how it's really hard for them to do speech and debate for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons that Ernest just talked about most recently was they're getting pulled out of schools, based not schools per se, but they're getting pulled out of these activities because they realize that these are star teachers that are willing to do something like speech and debate. And it's like, well, let's also make them department chair and let's make them head the committee that talks to the parents and the alumni and all this other stuff. And it becomes really difficult for them to, do this at a rate that, can support a whole speech and debate team. So
There's also another issue too.
sure, let's hear
And
it.
it's not just for the teachers, but there's something that I noticed, I've looked in magazines, I've looked at the rostrum for the NSDA. It's something that people really aren't discussing. And I'm going to say the R word, and that's racism.
Okay.
And I mean, we keep in mind, like I've coached, debate and speech for 20 years. I was also, involved in debate and speech, 4 years in in high school as well. And so, we've seen, Latino and African American coaches, come and go, and not as many have lasted as long as I have. And I mean, I'm semi-retired, but I come back and forth. And sometimes, I mean, I've heard from other coaches, I've heard from even white coaches, racism is definitely an issue. Um, and you see, I guess after I took a bit of a step back, and then I've been kind of like this year, I've been helping out the new coach, which is an alumni of my program. And you catch things. You notice that some coaches will say, coaches in power will sit there and talk to us a certain way with a certain tone and a condescending manner than they would somebody else who was a white coach.
True.
And, one of the things is it becomes, the kids see this. And it's so difficult to try to get other people to sit there and understand that there is some implicit and explicit racial bias when it comes to judging, when it comes to how coaches interact with each other. And what many people don't realize is that, like, they actually had an article, I think they had it in the Huffington Post or the Atlantic, that talked about, like, when dealing with racism on a constant basis, people end up going through post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think I posted it up on my Facebook page, and I'm like, wow, because some of the things that we're saying was some of the things, like, I'm like, I kind of have some of these things. And
Wow.
I mean, literally. Now, sad to say it, just I want to say a couple weeks ago, I did come to a tournament expecting there were going to be, more novices than there were from our team. 2 of the 3 novices dropped out. Like, they didn't come that day. So I was left with 1 novice. So I was helping with the kids. And we had a situation where we had our 3 judges, and first round goes up, none of our judges are judging. Second round goes up, none of our judges are judging. Third round goes up, none of our judges are judging. Keep in mind, everybody, like the entire, like the judging, the judges that we had, the 3 judges we had, the new coach, me, the students, were all people of color. And so 2 of the judges are like, why are we not in this judging at all? Like, we've been sitting around for hours. And I was like, maybe we need to go and, go talk to the tab room. And the new coach is like, well, they should probably have us, have you down for 4th round. 4th round goes up. None of them are on the list. So they went over and they talked to who was in tab room. And the conversation, if I can remember the exact wording was, oh, well, you didn't email us and let us know that you were neutral. And we're just assumed that you weren't neutral judges, or you weren't clean judges. We just assumed. And I'm like, so you were fine with letting us, or letting the judges just sit for hours, as opposed to actually walking 3-4 steps in the beginning before the tournament started and asking us, were these judges neutral?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
And I mean, it's stuff like that. It's like, well, you didn't do this. And it's like, but you're tab room. So you just sat there and just going to let people just sit for hours and not even judge. So basically that's what, 5 to 7 hours out of their life that they could actually have been studying for their classes or being with their families, versus actually go ahead and actually judge. And actually it was sad because 2 of the 3 judges we had were actual national. They qualified. They were national qualifiers in Lincoln Douglas. They did Lincoln Douglas for all 4 years of high school. They were more qualified than the judges that were actually judging, that were being put into that pool. So and they would have given better feedback. So if we're talking about education being a primary thing here, where wouldn't you put your most qualified, best judges in the pool?
Yeah, you have to do that first of all. Like, why would
Right.
why would you not? But I think
Right. So they're putting judges who may have just started coaching like the year before. And I'm not trying to say that they are not knowledgeable, but you've got people who are in, have 4 years, 5 years of experience, versus somebody has 2 or 3. And I mean, if I was passed up, like I had to judge policy debate finals at NSDA last year, and it was an honor, but I went up to, the tab room, and I was like, if there's somebody more qualified than me, I understand, because I haven't had a policy team in years. But they picked me and they said, nope, you were referred. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do my very best to fill out this ballot so that, you know, they get as much feedback as possible, and I do my absolute best with judging. And
Yes.
I felt I did, you know, but I'm like, let's put the people who are very qualified in this field to be in this, you know, this position, you know. So, but we see this a lot, you know. And then just the extra snarky comment, well, you and the coach didn't let us know this ahead of time. And it's like, so the onus of responsibility was on us, but you're the tab room staff. So if somebody doesn't get all the information in, how much work would it have taken for you to sit there and ask a simple question?
Yeah, I feel like if you're the
And that's
tab
just,
room staff, you have to do that. Like it's not even a tough question. Like just,
you know,
follow
you see what
procedure.
I'm right. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, we've had instances before where our judges are talked down to and yelled at. I've had very condescending remarks given to me. And I mean, like, some people would say, okay, well, maybe it's just coach bias. And I'm like, well, it's kind of hard to sit there and know if it's just coach bias or if they have a personal issue when I'm one of the few coaches of color and I'm coaching one of the few teams of color that come from a high poverty, you know, open enrollment school. So I'm
And
like,
that
it's very hard for me to sit there and differentiate to say, oh, if it's a coach bias thing or if it's racially implicit bias or explicit racial bias here. It's very difficult to sit there and say and differentiate here because I'm just like, well, we're the only full team primarily of color. And I mean, even still, there's been other people have come in that aren't associated with, you know, our school that have come to judge for us and have said, we see it's like night and day. We were never treated like this when we were judging for another school, and then we come here and all of a sudden we're treated differently.
and this is exactly why we need more representation in the
Right.
community. And every state is different. I've seen, from California to Kansas to all types of places. And sometimes, like, out here in the West where I'm at in California, it's more common for, a tab room to look a little bit better. But I can even say from Wisconsin, we need a tab room that can represent, different races and different sexual orientations. And I mean, you do see a few women in there, but women of color too, and all types of stuff. You know, that
Well,
way,
see,
that way,
you're absolutely right. Oh,
yeah,
you're
that way it's
absolutely right.
easier to
But
reach
see,
out.
okay. Right. But see, you're absolutely, and see, sometimes what'll happen is when you sit there and speak of inclusion, what'll happen is some of the powers that be is like, okay, well, we're going to look for yes men, or we're going to look for people of color to be into the tab room, but people who are going to agree with us. Do you
That's
see what I'm
true.
saying?
Yep.
And you're going to sit there and have that be a situation here. So people who don't have that experience, but will sit there and agree with whoever's in charge. Oh, well, now we've got the diversity there. So you should have no complaint. That doesn't work like
I
that.
think, I think, like you bring up a good point, and with that, instead of inclusion, we need education. Like honestly, I understand that, for example, there are just a lot more white people on Earth than there, or sorry, not on Earth, I guess, but on, like, in the U.S. or even in Wisconsin than, other races. So like I wouldn't mind seeing an all white tab room, but we need the education to teach them and how they can respond to other races and other people. Like
Well,
if those specific if that specific judge wouldn't have told you that, and or sorry, that specific person in the tab room wouldn't have told you that, we might not have had to have this conversation about racism, and it would have stayed the way it was with an all probably white tab room that just knew how to behave properly in situations that deal with race.
you know what, and on surface, I would agree with this, but you know what though, I always feel like first off, there should be accountability. I feel educate. I'm all for education except for this. I would say no, I want accountability instead because
Okay,
you know what, if you sit there and you punish a few toxic coaches who are displaying this type of behavior, guess what? Everybody gets educated very fast.
that
Just
is true.
oh, this coach is no longer here because of this. Okay, well, we know we won't be doing this again. You
that
know, and the thing
Yeah,
about it is they're quicker to punish, students, or they're quicker to punish some schools, but they're not. There's a double standard. People fail to realize is that in society, no, debate and forensics or debate and speech is just like a microcosm of society in general. So these same double standards that we see when we are looking at, like, I mean, just with the Botham Jean verdict and the woman that ended up going ahead, she murdered him. She's displayed in, explicit racism, and she only gets 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, yet we see people who are nonviolent people of color who might get in for like a drug offense or like a minor theft, get like 20, 30, 50-year sentences. Keep in mind these double standards that exist in society, they're going to happen in debate and speech as well until we sit there and we do something about that. And
That's
so
true.
that's why, you know what? I'm not going to sit there and say I want education, because see, you can go through cultural sensitivity classes all we want to. And people would say, oh, I understand. Oh, this makes so much sense. And then as long as the toxic people are in power, they're going to say yes and do whatever to keep that power. But if we sit up in here and we say, no, 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 there's accountability here. No, you need to be taken down a peg or two. No, we need to get you out and we need to put people in who are more objective. People are going to get educated quick because that accountability is there.
That's so true. So true. I think,
and
yeah.
I feel like too, some of the stuff and the stories that are happening, like I said, the students see these things. And I mean, I've even had instances, and I heard, and I can't confirm yet, but I even heard there was a rumor that even this year, there was a coach that told her students not to sit by ours.
Wow.
Yeah. I want to sit there and confirm this, but I mean, I've had that happen at least twice around the times that I was coaching. And instead of the coach coming up to me and saying, okay, well, this is an issue, blah, blah, blah. It was just, no, just stay away from those students. And I mean, it's like, they're kids. Everybody's all going to sit there and talk, and I never sit there and do that. I'm just like, respect the coaches, be respectful of the students. Don't say anything inappropriate. If you do, there will be consequences. And you sit there and you do that because, yes, they're young adults. Well, no, I take that back. I don't want to call kids young adults yet, because even after you graduate, you still have the mindset of a child. People still have to mature. But I mean, no, you see these things. I've seen it happen in forensics. I've seen it happen in debate here.
And then
these biases that happen are all affecting the children. So, I mean, our kids are coming out and already experiencing these instances of racism or bias or classism or whatever you want to call it. And they're graduating, and now they've got these, I don't know how, they got these experiences. And that leaves an indelible mark.
Man, that is crazy that would ever happen. I think like more coaches than we assume have had stories that are similar to that, and that's kind of a big problem in the community. I mean, even for myself, one thing that I remember being told about a specific coach, a white coach in the NSDA 2 years ago when we were in Florida for nationals. She was apparently upset about the students who got to the top 6 for NSDA in dramatic interpretation. And she was like, she basically made a comment that was kind of like, well, if I had some black kids who did some pieces about the black struggle, maybe maybe we'd have a national title too. And that's, oh man, that's upsetting. That is ridiculous. Unfortunately, that someone, first of all, would even think that, because I think that like they don't understand the struggles that we have dealt with. And like, how dare you even have a comment about someone doing a piece about their struggle significantly well? Like, I'm like, even if you had like a white kid and they did one about their families being Italian and how hard that was in their country and stuff, like, I would like if it's a great piece, I would love it because it is, something that's personal to them that they're able to do with a lot of emotion, some great gestures, and everything that's obviously encompassed to make an amazing speech and debate piece. And it's unfortunate to see someone be basically jealous of students of color being successful in the activity.
I mean, and the thing I honestly feel, because like we also discussed about who the students were, and I mean I couldn't have been prouder of them. I just
Yeah.
I all this success beyond, and it was so beautiful to see that journey. And I mean, I think the coach herself or himself, whoever it was, missed the point and needed to focus more on the piece and why it was delivered, or the pieces and why they're being delivered, versus, oh, well, you have this advantage. And that's one of those things where we see this a lot. I've seen this a lot in my experience, where there is this implicit racial bias, and you see it in terms of the rules that are put out there. And I was catching this. So when you brought up that you used to write your own poetry, it triggered something in me that made me remember. Back in the day, I had these students, I used to call them like the Venus and Serena of poetry, because they could write poetry, and you remember them because you competed against them.
Yes, I did. They were.
Yes, you did.
Man, I love all those
Yes.
second place trophies I have.
They had you on their radar. They're like, wait, we lost to Dante. We're gonna go back over and we're gonna practice this piece. We're gonna look. Oh, they were just hardcore and just amazing talents. And I mean, there's parts of me that in my my darker moments, I'll remember some of their poetry and be inspired. Like I stopped writing after they started putting poetry out. I was like, and I'm just gonna put my poetry away because this is nowhere as pure. And so, but there was, they're writing their own material, and they were doing, I had students who were writing material and doing farrago, doing oral interp, doing poetry. And after they were winning and they were successful, we were noticing that coaches were saying that, oh, them writing poetry is not educational.
Wow.
And I was like, excuse me? I'm like, we literally have to sit there and do this in class. Like when I was in high school, writing your own poetries, haikus, iambic pentameter, this was stuff you had to learn in order to sit there and get a grade in some of the English classes. And they're like, but you learn more trying to interpret someone else's poetry. I was like, wait. You do learn, but that doesn't necessarily mean you learn more. But I'm like, let's not sit there and stifle creativity because you don't feel that creativity is educational. Because see, though, no. Creativity can be creative and it can educate. And so, like, I was getting into it with some of the top coaches in the state who were trying to push and say we should not do original poetry in poetry anymore.
That's my favorite thing about Wisconsin is that we are allowed to do that. And like, I don't care. This is my 1 minute plea to the NSDA right now. You need to do away with the whole you got to submit an ISBN number and the barcode and all the stuff to do your piece. Like, this is like in this world where there's so much content, there's a benefit of being able to have students who can be creative and take things that I have never heard of and make amazing pieces out of them. Like, I want to see a really great DI where a kid takes a YouTube video that has less than 30 views and mixes it with a newspaper article he found from 1983 and turn it into like some spectacular piece that no one has ever seen. Like, it actually helps us because we're not having these same copycat cookie cutter pieces. We talked about this before where we see, oh, this kid who won in 2018. Oh, that was the exact same piece we saw get fifth place in 2012.
Right. But see, that's also on the coach as well. But see, well, I'm gonna disagree with you about the NSDA. And I'm only gonna say that because I understand why, because of all the copyright issues and legalities. However, not too long ago, because I think that was 2013, 2014, they were doing something where they were having students like submit their original poetry onto YouTube, and people were voting for which performances should go to nationals. And
that's awesome.
Yes, they did this, and then we got to see them perform at nationals. And I'm like, but it only lasted for like 2 or 3 years, and then we didn't see it no more. I really do urge, because those pieces were amazing,
Oh, I do
and I was
remember
like,
that now. I do remember that.
yes, and I was like, I urge NSDA to put in money or figure out some sponsors or donors, and they need to bring that back again. I love that, but I will also sit there and say that it's also on the coaches as well. See, a lot of times the coaches, especially when you have a large team, it's hard to sit up in here and like sit down and coach each individual kid. However, you kind of have to, like, I mean, when we had a large team, I would take the kids, I'd say, okay, whoever's really motivated, yeah, down over the summer, we'll have our own little speech camp, and we'll cut our own pieces and we'll go from there. Let's look, oh, this was done at nationals, don't do it. Let's
Yes.
look at all pieces. You see what I mean? So
Yeah.
we did work. And I mean, sometimes we even got a little flack for that. And then I was like, we're doing the same thing that you pay your kids, pay for your kids to go to debate and speech camps, and they're doing the same thing. The only difference is I'm paying my kids pizza. I'm like, just figure out what you want, either pizza or it's going to be Chinese food, So we were doing the same thing, but we were cutting pieces and we were doing stuff that was never ever done. And then the piece, and I always told the kids, I was like, this is where, you'll never be compared to somebody else. Because sometimes if you do a piece that's been done a million times, you got to compete against the competitors in around and all of these other competitors that did it after you.
Very
But like
true.
I said, there's other things that were put into place. I mean, we've seen it in the debate circuit as well, where we would sit there. I remember when we were running debate cases, we ran trypanosomiasis. Love that case. African sleeping sickness during the sub-Sahara topic. And we were doing really well with it. And then all of a sudden we noticed that the rules changed and we had to sit there and now stick to a novice topic, a novice packet. And the mindset was it's going to increase education. I've noticed that whenever they put rules in place that hurt or hinder the creativity of students of color, they always say, well, we need to think of education. We need to make sure that everything is educated.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to, wait a minute, we've gotten, to me anyway, we've gotten too creative. Now we're becoming more competitive. We need to sit there and change some things. Anytime I've sit there and I've seen us do well at something, I've seen changes. I've seen all of a sudden we got to sit there and change this rule. We've got to change this rule, and there's
Yeah.
things in place. And I mean, I've seen this, and these are these problems that I'm listing, and I'm not trying to necessarily complain, but it's things that maybe so many people are just not aware of, that maybe, we can all come together and come up with ideas and, say, okay, so how can we sit up in here and make this activity more inclusive? I mean, I think, especially within debate, it gets very difficult because, like, our students, we don't all have laptops. Some kids can't sit there and afford those laptops.
That's
We
so
can't
true.
necessarily keep snatching them out the school and going to tournaments to be competitive in some things. And so it means the coaches might have to get a laptop, or we might have to get permission and go through all these hoops to grab a laptop regularly out of the school. And then God forbid something happens to it,
Yeah.
and so in order for the kids to be competitive, they have to, in some instances, have laptops. Now, there's a rule in Wisconsin that says, well, the other competitor needs to have a hard copy of their case or have a viewing computer for the other team should there be a technological disadvantage. But here's the catch. That only applies to the state tournament.
Oh.
Any tournament, right. So when you're trying to qualify for state, you're still at a disadvantage if the tournament director decides they don't want to honor that rule.
Oh yeah, that's true. In Wisconsin, yeah, it's like that a lot. That's really crazy. Yeah, I forgot
You
about
see,
that.
our kids were, that's one of the reasons we stopped doing policy debate, because we were constantly at a disadvantage. Or like, of course, kids would sit there and maybe like they would give a case, maybe a hard copy of a case, and then it might be something different on their laptop. Or they say, oh, well, you get to use your prep time to look at the case. So
Yeah.
while you're reading through your case and they can't get the information down, then you're using up all 5-8 minutes of your prep time trying to at least read the case, write the tags down, and get the evidence at the same time. Now, guess who's at a disadvantage here?
Wow,
And
that's so true.
right, and then like we've developed a way where I told the kids, hey, you know what? You're gonna have your binders. They're gonna probably have their laptops. Stand up and look over their shoulders. Just stand up, take notes, and look over their shoulders. Do it. And a lot of them are a little reticent because they're a little scared of doing that. And I say, well, then don't complain if you lose your round. And so they learn to listen, and they would do it. And then we get critique sheets saying that you're being very unprofessional. You're
Wow.
being you're being disrespectful to the activity because you're not sitting down and taking notes. You're standing up, and this is making your competitor uncomfortable. And I'm like, why would one kid standing near another competitor make that other competitor uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the only reason I sit there and I said that this was okay is because I've seen this done between two white suburban schools, and there was never an issue. Because I was like, oh, we can do that? Shoot, I'm going to tell our kids to do that too. But we were seeing instances where the kids were now getting, or the kids would sit there and get yelled at by the judge. You shouldn't sit there and do that. Well, then have them come and talk to us because you all are at a disadvantage for these things. So stuff like this, and I mean there's these rules, and especially when you get to a point, we had another instance where we had judges that were, whenever our kids would speak, they would sit there and diddle on their phones. And when I sat down and said there needs to be accountability for those coaches, those judges, I was constantly being not even shouted down, but like ignored at meetings.
Wow.
And there were two other schools that were like, well, we want to start up debate programs. Three, I take that back. There were three other Milwaukee Public Schools that wanted to start up debate programs and came to that meeting and watched as coaches were giving some of the most, I want to say, like dumbest reasons, like, oh, well, are we going to punish judges for twiddling their thumbs too? No, because you don't see that, but you see people so stuck to their phones and not listening to students, and it's disrespectful and it hurts education.
Very
Oh,
true.
well, we need those phones in case there's an emergency. And I'm like, well, you're talking to somebody who's old school. I would love to know the statistics on how many kids fell out of windows and burnt to the ground back in, 1999, 2000, when they had tournaments that were 2 to 3 times the size of the tournaments in debate now.
True.
Oh, wait, nothing happened. But we didn't have cell phones back then. People got up and they went and checked on their kids if there was an emergency, and they called using the phones that they were in a room. So
Yeah.
why would you have those for emergencies now? They were giving me so many reasons just to hold on to the phone and to protect some, because they knew who those judges were. And it's just like, and I've heard of instances like this in other states as well. And it's kind of like, so you're going to not punish people who are an adult, but we're going to quickly punish the students. What does that tell the students here too? And a lot of times it would always be because the judges knew who they could sit there and get away with this with. And it was primarily the schools of color that did not have representation or were not having coaches that were sitting on, committee boards or, or
Yeah.
running. You see what I mean? So whenever there was, somebody who's not in a position of power and they knew who it was, well, they would sit there and do whatever they wanted to. And then you question those losses. You question what the critique sheets are saying. And you're constantly sitting here and having to analyze and then trying to sit there and explain some of this to your kids. It's difficult. But yeah, we were seeing stuff like this. And actually, because of that meeting, those coaches are like, we're not going to do debate. They're like, after seeing this, we're just not going to do it.
Wow. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it is like so many coaches and stuff just don't sometimes even want to do the activity anymore because of what you see.
Right.
And I don't know. I can understand that feeling. Sometimes the activity does get stressful, especially coming from this perspective. I
Right.
feel like as an African American, it just feels like there's a lot of things we have to do to work a lot harder. There are a lot of opportunities that we don't have, and we basically need to be afforded. And I do really hope that maybe this conversation is the stepping stone to leading towards a lot of different states and cities and local, both local and national leagues, and changing their minds in a lot of ways. So yeah, all I can really do at this moment is hope for the best. And
There's
yeah, we'll see where it goes.
I just wanted to say something because there's a positive lining. We know what the problems are.
True.
But see, I'm very glad that the NSDA is doing a lot in terms of inclusivity.
They are.
And so I've been going to the Black Coaches Caucus since its inception. And I mean, it's just awesome just to see the top coaches, from all over the nation all come together and like discuss these same problems here. But these are some of the top Black coaches in the nation, and they're coaching students of color.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of hope here because some of these coaches have been through some of the same things, if not worse, than we're going through.
True.
And they know how to deal with it, and they have the power and the clout to sit there and say, okay, no, this is not going to happen. No, we are going to sit there and put, such and such and such and such into tab room to learn how to tab room. I feel like we are our own resource. And I feel like we're coaching students, and I'm very proud to see students that I've coached come back and either judge or coach as well. And I think of like 4 or 5 that are coaching at various schools in Milwaukee, and then we have one that's in California right now. So I'm very proud of that fact. In fact, some of these kids are talking about who are graduating this year are talking about wanting to sit there and either start up a program or come back to the high school and coach.
Yeah.
So we're a resource.
I
so
agree
that
with
means
that.
you see what I mean? So, and I mean, just imagine all of these alumni that are, out there. That's where our power is. We need to grab them, and then we need to sit there and say, okay, we need you to go up into these schools. See, that's one of the other issues too. Right now, Milwaukee we have like maybe, I think 4 MPS schools right now that actually have an active debate program as of right now.
Yeah.
And that's out of like maybe, I want to say 15, 20 high schools. So we need to get more of the alumni into these high schools. Now, it is a struggle. See, I think that going towards and trying to start programs up with the teachers because they're so bogged down with all the things they've got to do, that it's problematic. But if you take a person who's like in college, who has some of the time, or somebody who may be working like some side job, but can come during a couple days during the weekend on a Saturday and work with the kids, you got something there. They've been through this. They know. And I mean, you can share resources. You can share stories. If they're like, you can share buses. This is how we can sit up in here and allay some of the costs that you're speaking of. Like we were talking about going to Glenbrook's. I was talking to another MPS school. It's like, hey, if we're going, talk to a few of your top students. Come on the bus with us. We'll all go. We'll share a room. I can sleep on the floor. Do you know what I mean? That's what we need to do. We need to have people come in and piggyback off of us, and we need to let the experienced coaches of color bring in some of the new alumni and sit there and piggyback and bring them into the activity, because that's what some of the experienced coaches, whether they were of color or white, were doing with me initially when things were more civil when I started coaching. I agree with that a lot. You see what I mean? We are our own resource. So I don't want to sit there and say we need to hope for the best. I say we need to come together and we need to do for the best, because this is not what's happening with me or what's happened to me or what's happened with the students and some of these bad experiences. That is just happening all over right now. I can just guarantee you that it's happening over. And so that means that there's a lot of people who aren't saying anything, and they want to speak out. And they want hope, like what you're saying, but we're our own resource. So we need to get together and say, let's sit there and do this. Let's sit up in here and push this activity. Let's take the top Black coaches or the top Latino coaches, and let's put us into the schools where we're needed the most. Hello?
Yes. It went out for a little bit.
It's like I keep getting a phone call that comes into my phone, and I just hurry up and hang up real quick, and then I'm fine. But no, we'll go ahead and like, we just need to sit there and get us. See, I feel like sometimes if I wasn't at Tech, we might not have a debate program, or we might not have a forensics program.
Yeah.
I've been working with it so much. I mean, and it's not too far-fetched to think that, because like I said, there's only 3 or 4 Milwaukee Public Schools that got an active debate program. There's like maybe, I want to say 6 or 7 that got an active forensics program. But it's out of like 20 high schools right now, 20 plus high schools. Why don't we have all some of these little roadblocks and things like that? So that's what I'm saying. We're our own resource. We need to take our alumni. We need to get them all together and say, okay, what are you doing? Can you at least coach this for a year? Can we get you up into here and get you into this school here? Okay, maybe you can come and coach where I'm at. Let me go to this school and start up a program here, and let's go from there. Okay, well then once I got something established here, either I'll stay here and then you can continue coaching where I'm at, or we can flip-flop. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's slowly sit up in here and start spreading seeds and start showing that, it can be done. And a lot of it is in those places, the inner city schools that, have high poverty, where a lot of kids just don't necessarily, they're not given the belief that they can do something like this, because on surface, debate and forensics looks very elitist.
Yeah.
And the biggest issue I sometimes have with coaching is coaching the kids, like having my voice be louder than their inner critic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very true.
So big on thinking that they can't, that you have to sit there and yell louder than their inner critic to convince them they can, and that they do, or they can do, and get them to do it. A lot of times, like with some of our novices, like, right, even this year, like they're not doing so well. And I said, okay, so how much time are you spending at home looking at this stuff? And you see where that starts to devolve. And I'm like, you got to go ahead and go over this stuff. You have our cell phone numbers. Ask us questions. Get up onto Messenger and like ask us, hey, what's this evidence? Hey, we don't understand this part of our case. Hey, do this. And you just got to keep convincing them to do that type of stuff so that they're doing that stuff at home. But I mean, or you got to figure out other creative ways of getting the kids to sit there and understand. But, yes, you got to work harder. But the benefit is you are now bringing more into this activity as well. But we need to sit there and really do a lot with our own resource and look at ourselves as this resource, because we can't look at anybody else.
That's true. I really like that idea. And I think that that's a really great start. What I definitely think everyone should be doing, if you are listening to this podcast, if you are a college student, please go to your, like, either the local one of the college you're at now, or if you're still in your hometown, like, go to your public school system, the schools that you went to, start teams there. Start teams at the schools that were next door and they didn't have a program, stuff like that. Keep trying to bring more speech and debate teams out. It would be awesome if every single MPS school had a speech and debate team. Like, it would be crazy.
We had that at one point. We were doing that within urban debate. And I think urban debate was a very good test to show exactly what was wrong. And the reason was never, in my opinion, it wasn't money, or it wasn't just money. The locus of a team is always going to be the coach. It's always going to be the coach. And it was a matter of making sure that we had coaches that, or were able to foster coaches that were passionate enough about this activity that they continued on it no matter what. And I feel like the most passionate coaches that, the most altruistic in a sense, are the ones that survived. Does that make sense? And that's the biggest thing that I've seen personally. I feel like urban debate it's an excellent start, but I feel like they need to do more in terms of like taking care of the coaches. Yeah. They do a lot. Like, initially they were doing all these summer camps and, hey, we'll coach the kids so that they have these summer camps and this and this. And I'm looking like, this is great. We need to make sure that this is fun, because if we don't make it fun, then the kids won't come back. True. I feel what we really need to do is we need a summer camp for the coaches, because True. The coaches need to know how to run tab room. The coaches need to know how to sit there and do a critique. The coaches need to know how to sit there and run counter plans or like, different forms of debate. See, and that's the other thing is I love the urban debate, idea or the concept, but then it needs to be always malleable and adjustable for different cities and different situations. We switched from policy to Lincoln Douglas to, in essence, kind of save our program because there was just so much instability. Sometimes kids would get pulled out because of sports, pulled out because of grades, pulled out because they're changing schools, that you had to switch partners like at the drop of a dime. And then if the partnerships didn't work, you'd lose half your team.
Yeah,
When we started in Douglas, then it's like, okay, well, we still have the instability, but we were buffered against it because, hey, if you got one student or you got 15, you're going to sit there and be able to still compete. You are still going to be able to qualify for state. You can still qualify for nationals. The team model just did not necessarily work for us. But once we saw that there were students that were dedicated and wanting to work hard, we can always put teams together once we knew who was stable and who wasn't. And even if they weren't and something still happened, guess what? They had Lincoln Douglas to fall back on. But there
true.
needs to be something malleable to sit there and buffer against some of these things. And I feel like more schools need to do that Lincoln Douglas debate model. Just a little philosophy, and then you just sit there and you use logic and you use good argumentation and in impact analysis or impact calculus, and then you can sit there and win most of your debates. So I feel like I feel like it's a great start, but we noticed that it was the coaches, and I feel like I said, we need to sit there and we need to train the coaches, and we need to push them to get out into other tournaments too, because a lot of times within the urban debate system, initially, they were like, "Oh, we're fine if schools just do urban debate here, and then don't go out into WDCA." And I was like, "But if things fall through with urban debate, then what are these schools that are dependent on urban debate now going to do?" And that's, you know what I mean? Or you have a situation where they would do like one or two debates, I think like one debate a month. And so the kids got 2-3 weeks to prepare for the next debate, but your mind starts to get weak. Like there's no other activity that's like, okay, we're only going to go to one golf event this month, one golf event next month, or we're going to do one football game this month. And then 3 weeks later, we've got another football game. You keep the kids engaged so that they keep staying. That model there was just that was a flaw there too, because you'd have sometimes less students because they need to be engaged. And that's why some of the stronger teams were the ones that were going to tournaments on a regular basis.
That is very true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
I definitely
sad,
get that. So
yeah, sad right now too, the urban debate that we have in Milwaukee, and I'm just going to sit there and say it, it does not cater right now to students of color. And if someone wants to be mad that I said it, well, I said it. I'm going to be like Rihanna. Yeah, I said it. Now, go ahead and look right now at the schools that are actively doing it, and then tell me I'm wrong. You
yeah,
know, so many schools that could benefit from this activity, but we don't have people really going and trying and pushing to get those schools into these debates and into these debate tournaments. So I said it, prove me wrong.
yeah. I like it, and I would agree. Kind of what all you said as a whole.
Yes.
I don't know how the UDL specifically in Wisconsin really works, so it's hard for me to agree with that opinion. But I think you
Right.
definitely are bringing some things on the head about getting more Black students to do speech and debate as a whole, and then just with everything, it's been so interesting to just hear your words and your insight. And these are the conversations that I want to continue to have with a lot of coaches and students and alumni, and that's why I'm bringing these people on the podcast. I hope that these are conversations that we'll be able to have for a long time and be able to fix a lot of these problems and these issues in speech and debate. And for the listeners, it's not just with African American students and everything. We're gonna have episodes where we're talking about women in debate. We're talking about people with mental disabilities and physical disabilities in debate and speech and debate as a whole. We're really trying to hit the nail and fix, hopefully, fix the world through this idea in this podcast, because speech and debate is so amazing, and it's an activity that has literally been touching so many lives as far back as 1929, if I'm not mistaken, and it needs to touch more. And we need to be on the forefront to make that happen. So definitely, definitely thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. If you are listening to this podcast and you love it, please give it a 5-star on iTunes. The more 5 stars we get, especially as the episodes come out quickly, we can get on new and noteworthy, and that'll be great. Make sure you're subscribing if you're listening to this on YouTube when it comes out, and then follow me on Instagram. Follow me, and let's just go and let's just try to make the world of speech and debate a better place. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you once again to Ernest Chomicki for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, well, thank you. This was a huge honor, and I'm sorry if I talked a little too much, if I was a little loquacious.
Oh no, this is great. I think that hopefully the people will stay on and listen to the entire podcast. It's definitely going to be a long one, but it's also going to be an impactful one, and one that's going to change a lot of things. So before my phone dies, I will say goodbye to everyone. Like I said, like, subscribe, all the normal stuff that those cliche YouTubers say. And please give this a 5-star on the podcast app if you're listening. Much love to you. Peace out, everyone. Bye.